The world beyond. What happens when we die? There is a moment that every human being is moving toward. It does not matter whether we are powerful or forgotten, wealthy or poor, surrounded by family or standing completely alone. It does not matter what language we speak, what God we worship, or whether we believe in any God at all. One day the heart will stop, the lungs will fall silent, the electrical signals inside the brain will begin to disappear. And then, according to everything we can observe from the outside, the person we knew will be gone. But here is the mystery. What, exactly, has disappeared? The body remains. Every atom is still present. The face is still recognizable. The brain, the organ that once produced memories, fears, dreams, and love, is still physically there, yet the person is no longer answering. Somewhere between the final heartbeat and the silence that follows, an entire inner universe appears to vanish. Or perhaps it does not vanish at all. For thousands of years, human beings have claimed that death is not an ending but a crossing. Priests have described kingdoms beyond the grave. Philosophers have argued that the mind may survive the body. Families at deathbeds have reported final visions, unexpected moments of clarity, and words spoken to people no one else could see. In modern hospitals, some patients revived after cardiac arrest have described watching their own resuscitation, moving through darkness, encountering an overwhelming light, or experiencing a panoramic review of their lives. Scientists have proposed explanations involving oxygen deprivation, altered brain chemistry, memory reconstruction, dreamlike states, and hidden bursts of neural activity. But none of these explanations has closed the case. Because science has learned a great deal about how the body dies. It has not yet demonstrated what happens to subjective experience when death becomes irreversible. Tonight, we are entering the oldest investigation in human history, not to prove heaven, not to prove oblivion, but to follow the evidence as far as it will take us, and to confront the possibility that the final mystery is not death itself. It is consciousness. Long before there were laboratories, electroencephalograms, or intensive care units, human beings were already preparing their dead for a journey. The earliest people left no written theology behind. We cannot interview them. We cannot know precisely what they believed. Archaeologists can only study what remains. Bodies placed carefully in the earth, objects arranged beside them, pigments scattered across bones, and possessions carried into graves. Such burials do not automatically prove belief in an afterlife. A body may have been buried for practical, emotional, social, or symbolic reasons, but careful treatment of the dead reveals something unmistakable. Our ancestors did not always treat death as ordinary disposal. They responded to it with ritual. The dead body was familiar, but also strangely transformed. It resembled a sleeping person, yet it did not awaken. It carried the face of someone loved, but no longer contained the recognizable presence that had animated it. The first mystery may have begun there. A child sees the body of a parent and asks a question that has never stopped echoing. Where did they go? The answer changed from culture to culture, but certain patterns returned with remarkable persistence. Death became a road. Death became a river. Death became a door. Sometimes the soul descended beneath the earth. Sometimes it climbed into the sky. Sometimes it entered another body. Sometimes it waited for resurrection. Sometimes it stood before judges. Sometimes it reunited with ancestors, and sometimes death was imagined not as travel to another location, but as awakening from an illusion. Among the most elaborate surviving maps of the world beyond death came from ancient Egypt. What we now call the Egyptian Book of the Dead was not originally one single standardized book. It was a collection of spells, declarations, prayers, and ritual instructions intended to help the deceased navigate the dangerous world beyond the grave. The afterlife was not imagined as an automatic reward. It was a journey filled with gates, guardians, transformations, and judgment. For the Egyptians, preserving the body was connected to preserving identity. Names mattered. Images mattered. The heart mattered. In one of the most famous scenes, the heart of the deceased was weighed against the principle of Mat, represented by a feather and associated with truth, justice, and cosmic order. It was understood not only as an organ of life, but as a center of memory, thought, emotion, and moral character. The dead were therefore not judged by wealth or social appearance alone. Their lives were placed on a scale. This image contains an idea that would reappear across civilizations. What if death reveals the true weight of a life? The Egyptian answer offered both comfort and terror. Death did not destroy meaning, but neither did it erase responsibility. Centuries passed, empires rose, languages disappeared, yet the dead continued to stand before imagined courts. In ancient Mesopotamian traditions, the underworld was often depicted as shadowed and severe, a destination that did not necessarily reward the virtuous with eternal happiness. In parts of the ancient Greek imagination, the dead became shades inhabiting a diminished realm. Death was survival, but not always the kind of survival anyone would desire. Later Greek philosophy transformed the debate. Plato argued for the continued existence of the soul and treated bodily death as a separation rather than total annihilation. Other ancient thinkers, particularly materialist philosophers, took a radically different path. They proposed that mind and personality depended upon physical matter and would disperse when the body broke apart. The disagreement sounds surprisingly modern. One side said consciousness is more fundamental than the body. The other said consciousness is something the body does. More than 2,000 years later, neuroscience and philosophy are still fighting over a more sophisticated version of the same question. Across the religious and philosophical traditions of South Asia, another model became deeply influential. Life and death were not opposite destinations but phases within a larger cycle. Birth led to death, death led to rebirth. Actions carried consequences beyond a single lifetime, while liberation involved escaping the cycle itself. Within Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain traditions, these ideas developed in different ways. They should not be collapsed into one identical doctrine. Some emphasized an enduring self or soul. Others questioned whether any permanent independent self could be found at all. That distinction is profound. Perhaps the question is not, where does the self go after death? Perhaps the deeper question is, what is the self that we expect to continue? Consider your own identity. You possess memories from childhood, but many have faded or changed. Your body has grown and replaced much of its material. Your beliefs may be different from what they were 10 years ago. Your moods change from hour to hour, yet beneath these changes you experience continuity. You call the infant in an old photograph me. You call today's thinking person me. You assume that tomorrow morning, someone with your memories will awaken and still be me. But what creates that continuity? Is the self an enduring entity? Is it a story maintained by memory? Is it a process rather than an object? Or is it, as some traditions suggest, a temporary pattern mistaken for something permanent? The mystery of the afterlife cannot be separated from the mystery of identity. Before we can ask whether something survives death, we must ask what that something is. The Abrahamic religions introduced and developed further visions of moral accountability, resurrection, divine judgment, paradise, punishment, mercy, and the ultimate transformation of creation. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam contain diverse interpretations rather than one simple picture. Ideas developed across centuries through scripture, commentary, philosophy, art, and popular imagination. Even within the same faith, believers have disagreed about whether the soul enters an immediate conscious state, awaits bodily resurrection, undergoes purification, or experiences realities that human language can describe only through metaphor. Images of gates, gardens, fire, books, scales, angels, and thrones gave form to what could not be. To a skeptic, these may appear to be cultural constructions. To a believer, they may be revelations translated into symbols the human mind can understand. The investigation reaches its first major obstacle here. Different cultures describe different worlds after death. Does that contradiction weaken all afterlife claims? Perhaps. If one tradition describes reincarnation, another resurrection, another an ancestral realm, and another complete dissolution, they cannot all be literally identical accounts. But there is another possibility. Maybe human cultures are not photographing the next world. Maybe they are interpreting an unknown experience through familiar symbols. A person living beside a great river imagines crossing water. A desert civilization imagines a garden. A royal society imagines a throne and judgment. A culture shaped by cycles of seasons imagines rebirth. The variety of afterlife beliefs may indicate invention, or it may show that something beyond ordinary experience is being filtered through language, geography, expectation, and memory. At this point, we have only belief, philosophy, ritual, and tradition. No monitor, no controlled observation, no patient return from irreversible death under scientifically documented conditions. For most of history, medicine could not even define the exact moment when life ended. A person stopped breathing, the pulse disappeared, the body cooled, death seemed immediate and obvious. But then resuscitation changed the meaning of the boundary. Modern medicine learned that a stopped heart does not always mean an irreversible ending. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation can move blood through the body. Defibrillation can sometimes restore an effective rhythm. Mechanical ventilation can support breathing. Drugs can influence circulation. In some circumstances, people who would once have been declared dead can be revived. The line moved. Death began to look less like a single instant and more like a biological process. This created a disturbing question. If a person can lose heartbeat, breathing, and visible responsiveness, then later return, where were they during the interval? Medically, cardiac arrest and irreversible death are not identical. During cardiac arrest, circulation has stopped, but resuscitation may still restore it. Death is determined when the loss of vital functions becomes permanent or irreversible according to accepted criteria. Medical frameworks distinguish between permanent loss of circulatory and respiratory functions and the loss of all brain functions depending on the circumstances and legal system. This distinction is essential. People who report near-death experiences have returned. Therefore, whatever they experienced occurred near a boundary from which recovery remained possible. Their accounts do not prove what happens after irreversible death, but they may reveal what consciousness does while approaching that boundary, and that alone is extraordinary. Imagine a hospital room during cardiac arrest. The patient is unresponsive. There is no effective heartbeat. A medical team begins compressions. Oxygen is delivered. Medications are administered. Commands are spoken quickly. Seconds become minutes. From the outside, there is urgency, noise, and physical intervention. From the inside, according to some survivors, something entirely different is. They report silence, distance, peace, a sensation of leaving the body, a view from above, movement through darkness, a presence or light that feels intelligent, loving, or impossibly familiar, a reunion with deceased relatives. A boundary they understand they cannot cross if they wish to return. Then, suddenly, pain, sound, weight, and the body. These reports are commonly called near-death experiences, or NDEs. No single feature appears in every case. Some people remember nothing. Some describe fragmented dreams. Some report confusion or fear rather than peace. Some encounter figures connected to their religious background. Others describe light or presence without identifying it with any religion. Researchers have documented recurring themes including perceived separation from the body, altered time, vivid light, heightened clarity, encounters, life review, and a sense of crossing or approaching a point of no return. Contemporary reviews emphasize both these recurring patterns and the complexity of interpreting them. The life review is among the most unsettling features. Survivors sometimes describe reliving events not as distant memories but as immediate experiences. They may feel the emotional effects of their behavior from the perspective of other people. A cruel remark is experienced from the position of the person who received it. An act of kindness appears more important than it seemed at the time. Moments forgotten for decades return with intense detail. If these reports are interpreted spiritually, the life review resembles judgment, not judgment imposed by an external court, but complete exposure to the moral consequences of one's actions. If interpreted neurologically, it may reflect rapid memory activation under extreme physiological stress. Either explanation raises questions. Why would a dying brain construct a moral narrative? Why do ordinary interactions appear more significant than wealth, status, or public achievement? And why do so many experiencers return convinced that relationships mattered more than almost everything else? This does not prove the existence of a cosmic moral order. Human beings already possess moral concerns, guilt, attachment, regret, and empathy. A brain under extreme stress might reorganize those concerns into a powerful final story, but the story often changes the survivor. Some people report reduced fear of death. Some become less interested in material success. Some feel more compassionate. Others struggle to return to normal life because ordinary reality feels less convincing than what they experienced. Not every transformation is positive. An experience can create confusion, loneliness, difficulty communicating with family, or a painful feeling that one has returned from somewhere more real than everyday life. A systematic review of research published from 2014 through 2024 found that NDEs can produce lasting changes, including personal growth as well as social and emotional difficulties. The meaning assigned to the event strongly influences its aftermath. A hallucination can also change a life. A dream can change a life. A traumatic event can change a life. Transformation is not proof that an experience revealed an external world, but dismissing it as only a hallucination does not solve the mystery either. The word hallucination names a type of experience. It does not automatically identify the complete mechanism, timing, or meaning behind it. The brain can create convincing realities. Every night during dreams we accept impossible events without recognizing the contradiction. We see people who are not physically present. We enter locations that do not exist. We experience fear, love, grief, and wonder while lying motionless in darkness. Under anesthesia, seizures, fever, oxygen deprivation, certain neurological disorders, and psychoactive substances, perception can become profoundly altered. So perhaps near-death experiences are extraordinary dreams produced by an extraordinary crisis. This is one of the strongest naturalistic hypotheses. When blood flow falls, the brain is deprived of oxygen and glucose. Neural networks begin to malfunction. Vision may narrow. Disinhibition may allow normally separated brain regions to communicate in unusual ways. Stress chemicals may shape emotion and memory. The mind may combine sensations, expectations, fragments of memory, and later information into a coherent narrative. A tunnel could emerge from changes in visual processing. A bright light could result from abnormal activity in visual pathways. The sensation of leaving the body could involve disruption in brain systems that integrate sight, touch, balance, and spatial awareness. A feeling of peace could be connected to neurochemical responses or detachment from bodily pain. The appearance of relatives could arise from memory and emotional expectation. This model has explanatory power. It requires no soul leaving the body. It requires no invisible world. It uses mechanisms already known to produce altered experience, but it faces difficult questions of its own. Why are some experiences described as more organized and vivid than ordinary dreams? Why do some occur when measurable brain function appears severely disrupted? Can every apparently accurate perception be explained by prior knowledge, chance, reconstruction, overheard information, or incomplete observation? And most importantly, when exactly is the experience formed? It may not occur during the deepest point of cardiac arrest. It could emerge as consciousness is being lost or restored. A brief experience created during recovery could feel timeless and later be remembered as having occupied the entire period. Dreams demonstrate that subjective time is unreliable. A complex sequence can seem to unfold inside a short physical interval. Memory is also reconstructive. We do not retrieve perfect recordings. Each act of remembering can reshape what is remembered. Questions from researchers, conversations with family, religious language, media images, and repeated storytelling may gradually influence the final account. None of this means survivors are lying. A sincere memory can be inaccurate. A powerful experience can be internally real, without corresponding literally to external events. This is why researchers have attempted prospective studies, rather than relying only on stories collected years later. One of the most discussed efforts was the AWARE research program, designed to investigate awareness during resuscitation. In the AWARE-2 multicenter study, researchers followed 567 hospital cardiac arrest cases in the United States and the United Kingdom. 53 patients survived to hospital discharge, and 28 were able to complete interviews. 11 of those interviewed reported memories or perceptions considered suggestive of some form of consciousness, although the experiences fell into different categories rather than one uniform afterlife narrative. Brain monitoring was possible in only a subset of patients. The study also attempted to test perception more directly. Images were positioned so they could potentially be seen from an elevated visual perspective, but not from the patient's normal position. Audio signals were also used. This was important because an accurate identification of a hidden target during a claimed out-of-body experience would be difficult to explain through ordinary sensory processing. But the experiment did not produce decisive proof. No interviewed survivor identified the hidden visual images. One participant identified an auditory stimulus. The limited number of survivors, the difficulty of monitoring cardiac arrest, and the small number capable of detailed interviews made firm conclusions impossible. This is not evidence that consciousness left the body. It is also not evidence that all reported awareness was meaningless. It is an unfinished experiment conducted under some of the most chaotic and medically difficult conditions imaginable. The dramatic headlines surrounding such studies often go much further than the data. Some reports claim that science has proved consciousness continues after death. It has not. Others claim that neuroscience has completely explained near-death experiences. It has not done that either. What the studies show is narrower, but still important. The transition between consciousness, unconsciousness, cardiac arrest, resuscitation, and recovery may be more biologically complex than earlier models assumed. The dying brain may not simply switch off like a lamp. In some monitored cases, researchers have observed organized electrical activity during the process of dying. A 2023 study examined electroencephalographic recordings from 4 dying patients after withdrawal of ventilatory support. 2 showed increases in gamma activity and connectivity in brain regions associated with conscious processing. The sample was extremely small, and the patients could not report any subjective experience. The researchers did not claim that the signals proved consciousness, an afterlife, or awareness after death. This finding created one of the most intriguing clues in the investigation. For decades, many people imagined the dying brain as a machine losing power in a smooth, predictable decline. But biological systems are not always smooth. As oxygen falls and inhibitory controls break down, neural networks may briefly enter unusual states. Activity may surge before collapsing. Connections may form in patterns rarely seen during ordinary waking life. In animal studies, researchers have also observed bursts of coordinated brain activity shortly after cardiac arrest. Translating such findings to human subjective experience is difficult, and neural activity alone does not establish consciousness. Nevertheless, the results support the possibility that the brain's final phase can involve brief organization rather than immediate silence. That might explain the intensity of near-death experiences. A final surge could activate visual imagery, memory, emotion, and the sense of self at once. Imagine thousands of fragments, faces, regrets, childhood wounds, voices, moral emotions, suddenly connected into a single experience. The tunnel, the light, the life review, the presence, the feeling of total understanding, not a journey beyond the brain, but the brain's final great act of integration. It is a powerful hypothesis. But we must be precise. A pattern associated with consciousness is not consciousness itself. Brain measurements are indirect. Electroencephalography captures electrical activity from populations of neurons, not private experience. The same type of signal may serve different functions in different conditions. A dying patient cannot immediately explain what the signal meant. The scientist sees the wave. The patient, if recovery occurs, describes the world. Connecting the two remains extraordinarily difficult. There is also a deeper philosophical problem. Suppose researchers eventually map every feature of a near-death experience to a specific brain process. They identify the circuits involved in tunnels, lights, out-of-body sensations, peace, life review, and sensed presence. Would that prove the experience was nothing more than brain activity? Perhaps. But consider ordinary vision. Scientists can identify the brain regions required to see the color red. They can observe neural responses when a person looks at a red object. They can damage part of the visual system and eliminate color perception. Yet none of this fully explains why red feels the way it does from the inside. The gap between physical processes and subjective experience is sometimes called the hard problem of consciousness. Why should electrical and chemical activity produce an inner world at all? A computer can process information. A camera can record light. But does any of those systems feel anything? The human brain does. At least you know that your own brain is accompanied by experience. You do not merely process a sunset, you see it. You do not merely detect grief, You suffer it. You do not merely calculate love, you feel attached to another conscious being. How matter becomes experience remains unresolved. This matters because the afterlife debate often begins with an assumption that has not itself been proved. Materialism assumes that consciousness is entirely produced by physical processes in the brain. There is strong evidence that brain states and mental states are deeply connected. Injury can change personality. Anesthesia can remove awareness. Drugs can transform perception. Dementia can destroy memory and recognition. Every known part of mental life appears dependent, in some way, on the brain. That is powerful evidence. If the brain is damaged, the mind changes. When brain function stops irreversibly, it is reasonable to infer that the mind stops as well. But dependence is not always identical to production. A damaged radio distorts music, but it did not compose the broadcast. This analogy is often used by supporters of non-material theories of mind. They suggest the brain might filter, receive, or constrain consciousness rather than create it completely. The analogy is interesting, but it is not evidence. We know external radio signals exist because we can detect and manipulate them independently of a particular radio. No comparable external field of personal consciousness has been scientifically demonstrated. The brain as receiver theory therefore remains speculative, yet materialism also confronts questions it has not fully answered. Why does consciousness exist? Why is there a first-person point of view? Could awareness be a fundamental feature of reality rather than a late product of biological complexity? Could the brain shape consciousness without generating it from nothing? These possibilities belong to philosophy and theoretical inquiry, not established fact. The case remains open because our central object of investigations, subjective awareness, cannot be placed on a table. We can measure behavior. We can measure blood flow. We can measure electrical activity. We can ask people what they remember. But consciousness is directly accessible only to the person experiencing it. Every scientific study of consciousness therefore involves an unusual bridge. An objective measurement must be connected to a subjective report. During irreversible death, that bridge collapses. The subject does not return to report. This creates a permanent experimental barrier. A person revived from cardiac arrest can tell us about approaching death. A person who remains irreversibly dead cannot tell us what followed. The one witness who could settle the question is, by definition, unavailable. This does not mean the mystery can never be investigated. It means that certainty may remain beyond ordinary methods. There are other clues, though none is decisive. Near-death experiencers sometimes report observing events from a location outside the body. A patient may describe medical actions, conversations, objects, or details that appear accurate. Supporters argue that certain cases are difficult to explain through normal perception. Skeptics respond that hospital environments contain predictable activity. Patients may retain partial hearing. Details may be acquired before or after unconsciousness. Memories may be reconstructed from conversations. Correct statements may be emphasized while incorrect ones are forgotten. The strongest cases require precise documentation. What information was recorded before the patient could receive ordinary feedback? Who heard the original account? Were the details specific or general? Could the patient have seen or heard them normally? Were inaccurate details also reported? Was the event independently verified? Without such safeguards, an extraordinary story can become stronger each time it is retold. Human memory is not a courtroom transcript. And grief creates powerful conditions for meaning. A family who nearly loses someone wants the experience to matter. A survivor struggling with trauma may search for a framework. A researcher may unconsciously favor evidence supporting a theory. A skeptic may dismiss uncomfortable testimony too quickly. No participant in the investigation is completely free from expectation. Even the desire for neutrality is shaped by what we fear. Some people fear that death is the end. Others fear that it is not. An afterlife can be comforting, but it can also be terrifying. If consciousness survives, what kind of existence follows? Will identity remain? Will there be judgment? Will we meet those we loved? Will we remain ourselves without the body? Can memory exist without a brain? Can personality survive without hormones, sensory input, childhood development, and neural networks? The afterlife is often presented as reassuring, yet its philosophical implications are strange. Imagine existing forever. Not for a century, not for a million years. Forever. Would change continue? Would memory become infinite? Would individuality dissolve? Would eternal existence eventually become incomprehensible to a mind shaped by beginnings and endings? Religious traditions often answer that the next state is not merely endless earthly time, it is a transformed mode of being. But such language points beyond normal human experience. Perhaps eternity cannot be imagined by a brain that measures reality through sequence. We know before and after. We remember yesterday and anticipate tomorrow. A timeless state may be as difficult for us to understand as sight is for someone born without vision. The afterlife may be impossible, or it may be impossible to picture accurately. Another clue appears near the end of life, not during cardiac arrest but in the days and hours before death. Hospice workers and families have long reported end-of-life dreams and visions. A dying person may speak of preparing for a journey. They may describe waiting nearby. They may appear to converse with someone invisible to others. Some experiences are comforting, others are confusing. Medication, fever, organ failure, sleep disruption, delirium, and changes in brain chemistry can all affect perception near death. Therefore, a vision of a deceased relative cannot automatically be treated as evidence that the relative is physically present in another realm. But these experiences often differ, according to caregivers, from disorganized delirium. The person may appear calm, purposeful, and emotionally transformed. Perhaps the brain uses familiar attachment figures to reduce fear. Perhaps memory creates a final social environment. Perhaps dying activates ancient neural systems designed to protect the mind from overwhelming terror. Or perhaps, as many families believe, the dying person is beginning to perceive something the living cannot. Science can study frequency, brain state, medication, behavior, and emotional effect. It cannot directly enter the vision. There is an even stranger phenomenon sometimes called terminal or paradoxical lucidity. In reported cases, a person with severe dementia or another condition affecting cognition unexpectedly regains clarity. They may recognize relatives, speak coherently, recall memories, or express final thoughts after a long period of impairment. Some episodes occur close to death. Others occur earlier and are therefore better described as unexpected or paradoxical lucidity, rather than strictly terminal lucidity. The scientific literature includes case collections, reviews, caregiver interviews, and efforts to define and measure the phenomenon. Researchers agree that better documentation is needed and that possible mechanisms remain uncertain. To families, the experience can feel as though the person has returned one final time. A mother who no longer recognizes her children suddenly says their names. A patient who has barely communicated speaks a clear sentence. An expression that seemed lost returns to the face. Then the window closes. From a neurological perspective, the brain may retain islands of function that temporarily reconnect. Changes in stress hormones, network inhibition, inflammation, circulation, oxygen levels, or other biological processes might briefly improve access to memory and language. The brain is not damaged in a perfectly uniform way. A function can become inaccessible without every underlying trace being erased. But no complete explanation yet accounts for every reported episode. Again, the spiritual interpretation appears immediately. Perhaps the mind was never destroyed. Perhaps it was trapped behind damaged machinery and briefly became visible as the body released its control. That interpretation is emotionally powerful. It is also unproven. A temporary restoration of function can occur within the brain without requiring consciousness to exist independently of it. But the phenomenon challenges simplistic assumptions. We cannot always look at an unresponsive person and know that nothing remains inside. Silence does not necessarily equal absence. This lesson has consequences far beyond the afterlife debate. It changes how families speak to unconscious patients. It changes how caregivers understand dementia. It reminds medicine that the person may be more than the behavior currently visible. As the investigation moves forward, another pattern becomes clear. Every clue can be interpreted in at least two ways. The ancient burial is evidence of spiritual intuition or fear shaped into ritual. The religious vision is revelation or cultural imagination. The near-death experience is a glimpse beyond the body or a crisis-generated brain state. The accurate observation is non-local perception, or memory reconstructed from ordinary information. The electrical surge is a final burst of consciousness or disorganized physiology. Terminal lucidity is the mind separating from damaged brain tissue, or a temporary restoration of neural access. The evidence does not sit alone, it enters a worldview. This is why debates about death rarely remain calm. People are not arguing only about data. They are defending their deepest picture of reality. A strict materialist may see no reason to introduce a soul when brain mechanisms offer plausible explanations. A religious believer may see consciousness itself as evidence that reality contains more than matter. A person who has undergone a near-death experience may regard the event not as a theory but as the most certain moment of their life. Each position carries a different standard of proof. Science demands observations that can be repeated, measured, challenged, and independently verified. Personal experience is something else. You do not need a laboratory to know that you are in pain. You do not need external confirmation to know that you dreamed. But private certainty cannot automatically become public proof. A person may be completely honest and completely convinced while remaining mistaken about the cause of an experience. This distinction protects both science and dignity. We can respect the experiencer without accepting every interpretation. We can seek neurological explanations without mocking spiritual meaning. We can admit uncertainty without pretending that all explanations are equally supported. What then has been established? We know that death is a biological process, not always an instantaneous event. We know that cardiac arrest can sometimes be reversed. We know that some survivors report vivid, structured experiences. We know that these reports contain recurring elements but are not identical. We know that culture, expectation, memory, physiology, and brain function may shape them. We know that organized electrical activity can sometimes appear during severe physiological crisis or the dying process. We know that a signal associated with conscious processing does not by itself prove subjective awareness. We know that no controlled experiment has demonstrated that a personal consciousness permanently survives irreversible death. We also know that science does not yet possess a complete theory of consciousness. That last fact keeps the door open, but only slightly. An unexplained phenomenon is not proof of a supernatural explanation. Throughout history, lightning, disease, eclipses, and dreams were attributed to invisible beings because natural mechanisms were unknown. As understanding grew, mysteries became processes. Perhaps consciousness will follow the same path. Perhaps future neuroscience will show exactly how the sense of self, mystical presence, life review, and timelessness emerge from the brain. Near-death experiences may one day become no more metaphysically mysterious than dreaming. But another possibility remains. Maybe consciousness cannot be reduced entirely to the mechanisms we currently measure. Maybe the brain is part of the story, but not the whole story. The honest investigator must hold both possibilities without pretending they are equally proven. Today, the evidence strongly connects personal consciousness to brain function. Evidence for survival beyond irreversible death remains inconclusive. That conclusion may disappoint both sides. It gives the skeptic no final victory. It gives the believer no scientific confirmation. It leaves us where humanity has always been, standing at the edge, looking into darkness, trying to decide whether the darkness is empty. Yet the question of what happens after death may hide a second mystery. Why do we need to know? Animals avoid danger. Many show distress around dead members of their group, but human beings construct tombs, scriptures, philosophies, memorials, legal inheritances, family histories, and promises of reunion. We live not only with death but with knowledge of death. A child eventually realizes that life ends. From that moment onward, every decision occurs under an invisible limit. Time becomes valuable because it is finite. Love becomes frightening because separation is possible. Achievement becomes urgent because the future is shrinking. Memory becomes sacred because people disappear. The awareness of death may have shaped civilization. We built monuments so names would survive. We recorded stories so voices could cross generations. We formed moral systems that placed present behavior inside an eternal framework. We created art because beauty does not last. We had children. We protected communities. We asked gods for meaning. We asked philosophers for courage. We ask scientists for evidence. The afterlife is therefore not only a theory about the future, it is a force acting on the present. A person who expects judgment may live differently from someone who expects oblivion. A person who believes in reincarnation may interpret suffering and responsibility through a longer cycle. A person who believes life is singular and finite may consider every hour irreplaceable. None of these positions guarantees moral behavior. Believers can be cruel. Skeptics can be compassionate. Fear of punishment can control people, while hope of paradise can console them. Belief in another life can inspire sacrifice, but it can also cause this life to be undervalued. Belief in no afterlife can lead to despair, or it can produce a fierce commitment to justice here and now. What matters is not only what someone believes about death, it is what that belief teaches them to do with the living. This may be the most important clue of all. Across traditions, the question of death repeatedly returns us to ethics. The Egyptian heart is weighed. The life review reveals
consequences.
Karma links actions to future conditions. Ancestors watch how descendants live. Even secular remembrance asks what remains of a person's influence. Perhaps human beings invented these systems because societies need accountability. A person who escapes punishment in life may still fear a final court. A private act of kindness may matter even when no one else sees it. The afterlife becomes the place where justice, incomplete on earth, is finally completed. But this creates another painful problem. If there is a just world beyond death, why is the present world so unjust? Why do children suffer? Why do innocent people die unnoticed? Why do cruel people sometimes live comfortably? Religious traditions have offered many responses: free will, spiritual growth, divine mystery, karmic consequence, future restoration, or the limits of human understanding. None of these answers satisfies everyone. The problem of suffering remains one of the greatest challenges to belief in a morally governed universe. Yet the absence of cosmic justice is also difficult to accept. We want goodness to matter beyond temporary success. We want love to be more than chemistry destined to disappear. We want the dead to know they were loved. We want apologies to reach those who can no longer hear them. We want unfinished conversations to continue somewhere. This desire does not prove an afterlife, but it explains why the question refuses to die. Grief is where philosophy becomes personal. It is easy to discuss consciousness as an abstract problem until a familiar chair becomes empty. Then the question changes. It is no longer, can awareness exist without a brain? It becomes, where is she? Can he still know me? Was that the last time? Will we meet again? No equation can remove the emotional force of those questions. Science can describe the body's decline. It can explain why grief causes physical pain, sleep disruption, memory changes, and waves of emotion. It can help people survive loss. But it cannot currently tell a grieving family whether the person they love still exists in another form. Religion may offer an answer. Philosophy may offer a framework. Experience may offer private certainty. Science offers uncertainty. For many people, uncertainty feels cold, but uncertainty can also be honest. It protects us from false promises. It prevents speculation from being disguised as fact. It allows different traditions to coexist without forcing one interpretation upon everyone, and it preserves wonder. The mystery may not need to be solved in order to transform us. Imagine that there is no afterlife. Imagine that consciousness ends permanently when the brain can no longer function. In that universe, every moment of awareness is astonishingly rare. For billions of years before your birth, you did not experience the world. Then matter assembled into a living body capable of looking at the stars and asking why it existed. You were given a brief interval of color, music, hunger, memory, friendship, fear, and love. Every ordinary morning became a phenomenon that would never be repeated from your point of view. Under this interpretation, mortality does not make life meaningless. Mortality creates urgency. The fact that a song ends does not make it worthless. The fact that childhood disappears does not make it unreal. The fact that a person dies does not erase the life that occurred. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine that consciousness survives. The body fails, but awareness continues into a reality not accessible through ordinary senses. Death is not destruction but transition. The people we lost are not absent in an absolute sense. They have moved beyond our current field of perception. Under this interpretation, life may be a stage of a much larger existence. Our choices may possess consequences we do not yet understand. Separation may be temporary. The universe may contain memory even when human brains forget. But notice something remarkable. Whether consciousness ends or continues, the ethical demand of the present does not disappear. If this life is all we have, kindness matters because time is limited. If life kindness may matter because relationships and consequences endure. If there is no final judgment, we must build justice ourselves. If there is a final judgment, we should still build justice now. If we never meet the dead again, we must love people while they are here. If we do meet them again, the way we loved them here may still matter. The mystery leads back to the same place. This moment, the person beside us, the words we have not said, the wound we have not repaired, the life we keep postponing as though time were guaranteed. Perhaps the most dangerous belief is not faith in heaven or faith in oblivion. Perhaps it is the belief that death belongs only to other people. We behave as though life is permanent because the alternative is difficult to hold in the mind. We delay forgiveness. We remain in meaningless conflicts. We trade years for approval. We protect pride as if pride will sit beside us at the end. We collect objects that cannot remember us. Then death enters a family, a hospital, a street, or a quiet room, and the illusion collapses. The final boundary is no longer philosophical. It is present. People who work near death often describe a shift in priorities. Status loses some of its force. Small moments become vivid. Holding a hand can matter more than winning an argument. The sound of a familiar voice can become the center of the universe. This does not mean suffering is beautiful. Death can be frightening, painful, premature, and deeply unfair. There is no need to romanticize it. But its presence reveals what ordinary life hides. Everything is temporary. The question is not whether we can prevent all endings. We cannot. The question is whether awareness of the ending can make us live more truthfully before it arrives. The investigation began with a body in silence. We asked what had disappeared. We followed ancient maps into underworlds, courts, gardens, cycles, and realms of ancestors. We entered hospitals where stopped hearts were restarted. We listened to survivors describe light, distance, love, fear, and life review. We examined oxygen deprivation, memory reconstruction, unusual brain activity, and the possibility that the dying brain may remain active in ways we are only beginning to understand. We encountered sudden clarity in minds thought lost. We confronted the hard problem of consciousness, and at every stage the same wall appeared. We can observe the body. We cannot directly observe another person's inner world. We can revive someone from the edge. We cannot interview someone beyond irreversible death. There is currently no scientific instrument capable of detecting a soul leaving the body. There is also no complete scientific explanation for why physical matter produces subjective experience in the first place. The mystery survives between those two facts. Perhaps one day, technology will map the transition in extraordinary detail. Researchers may record the final activity of the brain cell by cell. They may predict which patients will report near-death experiences. They may reproduce tunnels, life reviews, sensed presences, and out-of-body sensations under controlled conditions. If every feature can be generated through brain stimulation, some will declare the afterlife disproved. But even then, the deepest question may remain. Does reproducing an experience explain away everything it might represent? A telescope can reproduce an image of a distant galaxy on a screen. That does not mean the galaxy exists only inside the telescope, but a dream can also reproduce a city that exists nowhere. The brain may be a window, or it may be a world builder. Determining which role it plays at death is the heart of the case. Future science may also discover that consciousness is not a single switch. Perhaps awareness breaks into components, memory disappears before sensation. The sense of body separates from the sense of location. Time collapses. Identity dissolves. Emotion remains after language is gone. What we call the self may be a coalition of processes that do not all end at once. In that case, asking exactly when consciousness ends may be like asking exactly when evening becomes night. There is a transition but no single visible line. And still, beyond the transition, irreversible biological death eventually arrives. What follows? The most truthful answer is the least dramatic. We do not know. Not, we have proved there is nothing. Not, we have proved there is another world. We do not know. Human beings often treat those words as failure. but they are the beginning of every serious investigation. To say I do not know is to refuse comforting invention and arrogant dismissal at the same time. It leaves room for evidence. It leaves room for faith. It leaves room for doubt. It leaves room for humility before a reality that may be stranger than any explanation we have created. The universe existed for billions of years before human beings appeared. Its laws formed stars, planets, oceans, cells, nervous systems, and eventually minds capable of wondering about the universe. Consciousness may be a temporary spark generated by that process, or consciousness may reveal something fundamental that our physical theories have not yet captured. Either possibility is astonishing. If the mind is temporary, then the universe briefly became aware of itself through us. If the mind continues, then death may be the moment when awareness enters a larger reality. We stand between these possibilities with no final map, only clues. Ancient prayers written for the dead, philosophical arguments preserved across centuries, hospital monitors recording unexpected activity, survivors returning with stories they insist were more real than dreams, families witnessing moments they cannot explain, and the silence of the billions who did not return. That silence can be interpreted as nothingness. It can also be interpreted as a boundary. A locked door reveals nothing about what exists on the other side, but it also gives us no right to invent what lies beyond it. Perhaps that is where the investigation must end, not with an answer, but with a choice about how to live under uncertainty. We can deny death until it surprises us. We can become obsessed with it until fear consumes the life we still possess. Or we can allow mortality to sharpen our attention. Look at the people you love. One day, either you will experience their absence or they will experience yours. That truth is unbearable. It is also what makes love urgent. There are words that should not remain unsaid. There are apologies that should not wait. There are people who need to know they mattered. There are ordinary moments happening now that memory will one day treat as sacred. A meal. A laugh from another room. A hand resting on a table. Someone calling your name. We search for the world beyond because we are afraid these things will disappear. Maybe they will. Maybe they will be transformed. Maybe every act of love becomes part of a reality larger than the individual. Maybe the dead continue only through the effects they leave behind. In children, memories, choices, stories that changed the lives of those who knew them. That form of survival is observable. A person can die and still influence events decades later. A sentence remembered from childhood can guide an adult decision. Act of courage can become a family story. A wound can pass through generations. So can kindness. Even without proving a spiritual afterlife, no human life ends entirely at the boundary of the body. Its consequences continue. But is consequence the same as survival? No. The song may continue in others even when the singer no longer hears it. The pattern survives, but the private observer may be gone. The original question therefore remains. When the brain becomes permanently silent, is there still someone who knows that anything exists? No civilization has answered this in a way that every other civilization accepts. No religion has produced evidence compelling to every skeptic. No scientific experiment has crossed irreversible death and returned with verified information. The mystery is intact. And perhaps it will remain intact until each of us reaches the boundary alone. At that moment, one of two things will happen. There will be no experience at all, no darkness, because darkness must be perceived, no silence, because silence must be heard, no awareness of absence, or there will be something. A continuation, an awakening, a return, a reality for which every human image was only metaphor. If there is nothing, we will never know that we were wrong to hope. If there is something, the greatest mystery in history will become, for each person, immediate knowledge. Until then, we live in the question, and maybe the question itself is not a punishment. Maybe it is an invitation to examine what we believe, to separate evidence from hope, to respect traditions without surrendering reason, to use science without pretending it has already explained everything, to hold grief without turning uncertainty into false certainty. And above all, to recognize that whatever waits beyond death, the life before death is already mysterious beyond measure. You are conscious. You are here. A brief moment in cosmic history, the universe is visible through your eyes. You can remember, you can choose, you can forgive, you can love. And one day, You will cross the boundary that no living investigator has fully mapped. Will consciousness disappear with the final activity of the brain? Will the self awaken somewhere beyond space and time? Will we meet the people we lost? Or will we discover that the person we called I was never what we believed it to be? Humanity has searched for thousands of years. The tombs, scriptures, laboratories, and testimonies have given us clues, but not a verdict. So now the question belongs to you. Do near-death experiences reveal the extraordinary final abilities of the human brain, or are they fragments of a reality beyond the body? And if you knew with certainty that death was not the end, how would you live differently today? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to The Last Belief, where we continue investigating the hidden histories of religion, the mysteries buried inside ancient cultures, and the greatest unanswered questions of human existence. Because sometimes, the most important truth is not the one we already believe. It is the one still waiting in the darkness.